Hello everyone. If you love heartwarming animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. Willow Creek was a town where time moved slowly, where neighbors still waved at each other, and where the biggest excitement came from the annual town fair. Nestled between rolling hills and quiet streets, it was a place of peace. But for Walter Grayson, peace often felt like loneliness. Walter had spent most of his life in service. For over 3 decades, he had been a police officer, patrolling the streets, catching criminals, and keeping his community safe. He had once been a strong man, standing tall with pride in his badge, always prepared to protect and serve. But time had a way of humbling even the strongest men. At 74, Walter was no longer the fearless officer he had once been. His back ached when he stood for too long, his hands trembled when he held his coffee, and his knees reminded him daily that his youth had long since faded. He lived alone in a modest, 2-bedroom house on Maple Street. His wife, Margaret, had passed away 5 years ago, leaving behind a silence that never truly left. Their children, grown and busy with their own lives, visited when they could, but their calls became fewer, their visits shorter. The only soul who remained by his side was Rex. Rex wasn't just a dog, he was Walter's partner, his last connection to the life he once lived. A retired K-9 police dog, Rex had served alongside Walter for nearly a decade. Together, they had tracked down criminals, searched for missing children, and faced danger side by side. They had saved lives, fought battles, and formed an unbreakable bond. When the department had decided Rex was too old to work, Walter hadn't hesitated to bring him home. Now, both man and dog were retired, living in quiet companionship. But even in his old age, Rex never stopped protecting Walter. He still followed him from room to room, his watchful eyes always scanning for threats. When Walter sat on the porch, Rex sat beside him, ears perked, as if still on duty. At night, he positioned himself between Walter and the front door, guarding the house like a silent sentinel. Walter often chuckled at his old friend's devotion. "You don't have to watch over me anymore, buddy," he would say, scratching behind Rex's ears. But Rex didn't seem to believe that. And in truth, Walter was grateful. The house felt less empty with Rex around. There was comfort in the rhythmic sound of his paws against the wooden floors, in the warmth of his fur on cold nights. Still, Walter knew time was catching up to both of them. Rex had slowed down. His once powerful legs weren't as strong as they used to be. His deep brown eyes, which had once been sharp and full of energy, were now clouded with age. He didn't chase after squirrels anymore. Climbing the porch steps took longer than it once did. But no matter how tired he got, he never stopped watching over Walter. And Walter, in turn, never stopped talking to him. "You remember that night we found that missing girl in the woods?" Walter would say as he stroked Rex's fur. "You didn't stop tracking until we brought her home. You were the best damn K-9 on the force, boy." Rex's tail would thump lazily, as if he remembered too. They were two old souls, bound by a lifetime of shared memories. And in a world that had slowly moved on without them, they only had each other. But neither of them knew that very soon, Rex's unwavering loyalty would be put to the ultimate test. Because no matter how many years passed, a true protector never retires. And Rex wasn't ready to let Walter go just yet. The days passed in their usual routine. Walter would wake up early, shuffle to the kitchen to make himself a cup of coffee, and sit by the window, watching the world wake up. Rex, always by his side, would settle at his feet, his ears twitching at every distant sound. Though both were aging, old habits never faded. Every morning, Walter would take Rex on a slow walk around the neighborhood, just as they had done for years. The path was shorter now, just a loop around Maple Street instead of the long treks they once took. But Rex still walked with his head high, scanning the surroundings like a soldier on duty. Walter knew it was instinct, a habit ingrained after years of police work. Still looking for trouble, huh? Walter chuckled, patting Rex's back. But Rex wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking out for Walter. That night, the air was colder than usual. A crisp autumn breeze swept through the neighborhood, rustling the leaves that had started to turn shades of gold and red. Walter sat in his usual chair, Rex lying beside him on the porch. They sat in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the town at night. Walter reached down and ran his fingers through Rex's fur. "You ever think about the old days, boy?" he murmured. Rex didn't move, but Walter could feel the slow rise and fall of his chest. "Used to be a time when I felt useful. When people needed me." Walter exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Now? Feels like the world kept moving, and I just got left behind." Rex lifted his head slightly, pressing his nose against Walter's palm. Walter smiled faintly. "Yeah, I know. I've still got you." The old man leaned back, staring up at the night sky. Neither of them noticed the light inside the house flicker. Neither of them noticed the warning signs of what was to come. Walter wasn't sure what time it was when he woke up, but something felt wrong. His body was heavy, his limbs weak. His vision blurred as he tried to move, but his muscles refused to listen. A sharp pain twisted in his chest, spreading like wildfire through his left arm. He tried to call out, but his voice was barely a whisper. He was having a stroke. Walter tried to reach for the phone on the bedside table, but his fingers barely twitched. His breathing grew shallow. He could feel himself slipping, fading. But he wasn't alone. Rex had been asleep at the foot of the bed, but the moment he sensed something was wrong, he sprang up. The old dog's instincts kicked in. He whined, nudging Walter's hand, trying to wake him. When Walter didn't respond, Rex let out a sharp bark. But no one else was in the house to hear him. Rex paced anxiously, looking from Walter to the bedroom door. He had to do something. His eyes darted to the phone on the table. It was out of Walter's reach, but maybe Rex could get it to him. With determination, the old dog jumped onto the bed and bit down on the cord, yanking the phone off the table. It crashed to the floor, sliding closer to Walter's limp hand. But Walter still wasn't moving. Rex whined, licking Walter's face, trying to stir him. Nothing. The dog's heart pounded in his chest. He had one more option. Walter always left the back door slightly ajar so Rex could go outside if needed. The old dog ran toward it, pushing it open with his nose. He had to get help. His legs burned as he ran, but he didn't stop. He charged across the yard, toward the nearest house. The neighbor, Mr. Thompson, was an early riser. Rex had seen him leave for work before the sun even rose. Reaching the porch, Rex jumped against the door, scratching at it furiously. Inside, Mr. Thompson stirred. The sound of desperate scratching woke him instantly. What the hell? He shuffled toward the door, pulling it open. And there was Rex, his eyes wild, barking, frantic. Mr. Thompson had lived next to Walter for years. He had seen how devoted Rex was to the old man. He had never seen the dog act like this before. Something was wrong. "Walter," he muttered under his breath. Rex barked again, turning and sprinting back toward Walter's house. And that's when Mr. Thompson understood. Grabbing his phone, he followed Rex, running as fast as his aging legs would allow. He burst through the open back door and rushed into Walter's room and found the old man collapsed on the bed, unmoving. "Oh, God," he gasped, fumbling for his phone. 911, "What's your emergency?" "My neighbor, he's had a stroke. He's barely breathing. Hurry." Rex whined, pacing anxiously at the foot of the bed as sirens blared in the distance. Walter's world had faded to nothing but darkness, but Rex had done what he had always done: he had saved his partner's life. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens piercing the quiet night. Paramedics rushed into Walter's bedroom, swiftly assessing his condition. His skin was pale, his breathing uneven, and his body unresponsive. They had to move fast. "Stroke, left side paralysis, weak pulse," one paramedic confirmed as they carefully lifted Walter onto the stretcher. Through the commotion, Rex stood at the doorway, his ears pressed back, his body tense. His deep brown eyes never left Walter. Mr. Thompson, who had been standing nearby, gently reached for the old dog's collar. "Come on, buddy. They'll take care of him." But Rex refused to leave. As they wheeled Walter toward the ambulance, Rex broke free from Mr. Thompson's grasp and ran after them, barking wildly. One of the paramedics hesitated. "Is this his dog?" Mr. Thompson nodded. "Yeah. He's the one who got me. He saved Walter." The paramedic glanced at the others before making a quick decision. "Let him ride along." Rex jumped into the ambulance, settling at Walter's side as the doors closed. The vehicle sped toward the hospital, the old dog keeping silent watch over his friend. At Ridgewood Memorial Hospital, Walter was rushed into the emergency room. Doctors worked quickly, administering medication to break the blood clot in his brain. Every second mattered. Rex waited. Sitting in the hospital hallway, his head rested between his paws, his tail still. He barely moved, except to lift his head whenever someone walked by. His ears twitched at every sound, but his eyes remained locked on the doors behind which Walter had disappeared. Mr. Thompson sat beside him, rubbing his hands together anxiously. Neither of them were used to feeling so helpless. An hour passed. Then two. Finally, a doctor emerged, pulling off his gloves with a sigh. "He's stable. The stroke was severe, but you got him here just in time." Relief flooded Mr. Thompson's face. "Can we see him?" The doctor hesitated. "He's unconscious," but his gaze dropped to Rex, who sat up immediately, his tail thumping once against the floor. "Let him in," the doctor said softly. "If that dog saved him, he deserves to be there." The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Walter lay still, his breathing steady but weak. Rex moved slowly toward the bed, his nails clicking softly against the tile floor. He sniffed the air, then gently placed his head on the mattress beside Walter's arm. Mr. Thompson wiped his eyes. He won't leave his side, will he? The doctor smiled. Dogs like him, they never do. And so, Rex stayed. Hours turned into days. Walter remained unconscious, but Rex never left his post. Nurses brought him food and water, but he barely touched it. He was waiting. Waiting for his partner to wake up. 3 days later, it happened. Walter's fingers twitched. His breath hitched, and then, his eyelids fluttered open. At first, his vision was blurry, his mind foggy. But then, he felt it. A warm weight against his arm. A familiar presence. Slowly, Walter turned his head. Rex. His old partner, his loyal friend, his guardian. Walter swallowed, his throat dry. He lifted his trembling fingers, barely brushing the fur on Rex's head. You stayed, he croaked. Rex let out a quiet whine, nuzzling into Walter's hand. His tail thumped weakly against the floor. A chuckle, hoarse, but real, escaped Walter's lips. Guess you saved me one last time, huh? Rex just wagged his tail. And for the first time in a long while, Walter didn't feel alone. Walter's recovery was slow, but he wasn't alone. Rex never left his side. For the first few days, Walter remained in the hospital, regaining strength in his weakened body. The stroke had left its mark, his left arm and leg were slow to respond, his speech slightly slurred. But the doctors were hopeful. You're lucky, one of them told him. A few more hours and, well, let's just say your dog saved your life. Walter only nodded. He already knew. Rex lay curled at the foot of his hospital bed, eyes watching Walter's every movement. Every shift, every sigh, every attempt to sit up, Rex was there. When Walter struggled to move his arm, Rex nudged his hand forward with his nose. When Walter winced in pain, Rex let out a soft whimper, as if feeling it too. The bond between them was unbreakable. It had always been. A week later, Walter was discharged. Mr. Thompson drove them home, helping Walter up the front steps of the house. It took effort, more than Walter would have liked to admit, but he was determined. Rex walked slowly beside him, matching his pace, his head near Walter's hand in case he needed support. Walter sighed as he stepped inside. The house was just as he left it, silent, still. But now, it didn't feel so empty. Rex padded toward his favorite spot near the fireplace and lay down, his tail sweeping across the floor. He watched Walter carefully, as if still on duty. Walter chuckled, shaking his head. You don't have to keep watch anymore, you know. I'm okay. Rex just blinked at him. Walter sighed, sitting down in his old armchair. His body ached, but it was nothing compared to the weight he had carried for so many years, the loneliness, the grief, the feeling of being forgotten. But now? Now, he wasn't forgotten. Because Rex had never let him be. Days turned into weeks. Walter went through physical therapy, learning how to move again. It was frustrating, exhausting, but Rex never left his side. When Walter had trouble gripping objects, Rex would nudge things closer to him. When Walter struggled to stand, Rex stood beside him, offering silent encouragement. And at night, when the house was quiet and Walter's mind wandered to dark places, Rex rested his head on Walter's lap, a reminder that he wasn't alone. One evening, Walter sat on the porch, looking out at the setting sun. The air was cool, crisp. Rex lay beside him, his fur catching the golden light. Walter reached down, running his fingers through the old dog's coat. "You never gave up on me, did you?" he murmured. Rex let out a small huff, his tail thumping against the wooden floor. Walter chuckled softly. "Yeah. I guess it's a good thing you're too stubborn to retire." The silence stretched between them, comfortable, familiar. For the first time in a long time, Walter felt at peace. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, Rex lifted his head, ears twitching. Ever watchful. Ever loyal. Because a true guardian never leaves his post. Walter's life had changed, not just because he had survived, but because he had been reminded that he was never truly alone. Rex had been more than just a dog, he had been a lifeline, a protector, and a friend when Walter had no one else. Even in his old age, Rex had proven that loyalty, love, and courage did not fade with time. The months that followed were filled with small victories. Walter grew stronger, regaining control over his body with each passing day. His steps became steadier, his hands more stable. And through it all, Rex was there. Neighbors began stopping by more often, checking in on Walter, asking about Rex. The story of how the retired police dog had saved his owner spread throughout the town, inspiring many. People who had once walked past Walter without a second thought now greeted him warmly. He was no longer just the quiet old man on the corner. He was the man with the brave dog. One evening, Walter sat on his porch, stroking Rex's fur. The old dog sighed in contentment, eyes half closed. "You saved me, buddy," Walter murmured. "In more ways than one." Rex thumped his tail once, as if saying, "Of course I did." And in that moment, Walter realized something. Rex's watch had never been about duty. It had been about love. Because true guardians never retire. They simply watch over us, until their very last breath. The lesson of loyalty and love. The story of Walter and Rex teaches us a profound lesson about loyalty, companionship, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. In a world where relationships often fade with time, Rex's unwavering devotion to Walter reminds us that true love and loyalty never grow old. Walter had spent years in solitude, believing his best days were behind him. Yet, in his darkest hour, it was not technology, wealth, or social status that saved him, it was the love of a faithful companion. Rex, despite his aging body, proved that acts of kindness and bravery are not limited by time or circumstance. This story reflects real-life situations where animals have saved lives, offered emotional support, and remained by their owners' sides through hardships. Whether it's a service dog guiding the visually impaired, a therapy animal comforting the sick, or a loyal pet simply offering unconditional love, animals teach us what it means to be selfless. In today's world, where people often feel disconnected and alone, Rex's actions remind us to cherish those who stand by us, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. Because in the end, loyalty is not about words, but about presence, devotion, and the willingness to protect those we love.